Find a world-class EMS physician and medical director.
I speak pretty good English for a guy from Detroit.
With an EMS veteran and all-around nice guy.
Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Oh, that's so good. Oh, my God.
Well, you get the EMS show. Taking it to the people, here's your host, Dr. Ritu and Mike Vercast.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the EMS show. Mike Vercast, Dr. Ritu, along with our special guest, Miranda Franco. Welcome to the EMS show. We are definitely taking it to the people as we usually do. Would you agree, Ritu?
Taking it, and in this case, one person at a time.
That's right. Well, you know what? I mean, it's just like all the other work we do, right? If we can just make a difference for one person, that's our kind of our new little motto here, right? Because, you know, there might be one or seven. It's all good.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure, you know, I was talking to my parents earlier today, and they were asking, do you have a show tonight? So I'm assuming that of the three people watching, two of them are them. And it's my dad's birthday. So happy birthday,
well, happy
Dad.
Birthday.
It's pretty cool that I have a 50-year-old dad, seeing as I'm 56, or maybe, you know. Anyway, so happy birthday, Dad. Hope you're having a good day. He actually they probably aren't watching because my brother was on his way to pick them up to take them out to dinner. So probably they aren't watching now that I think about it. So we have three people that we don't even know who they are.
I think one of them is my lovely bride who has chimed in.
Sweet.
Yeah. We get more people that listen rather than watch, apparently. I don't know if it's because of Ritu or what it is, but
with that glamorous mane, you're not capturing more people with that?
I know. The COVID mane continues. I keep toying with whether or not I'm going to cut it off. Mike doesn't like it very much, actually.
There is a line of people that I actually thought about doing this. Is a fundraising opportunity. Brent Myers, Jeff Jarvis. There's a number of folks that I think Ed Rock would probably get in on it. That if we lined them up in $25-50 a piece, maybe 100, you get an opportunity to get Ritu's hair whipped back into pre-COVID shape. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. We will all be together in about a week. So
that's true. Yep. We'll all be at the State of Jefferson conference. So if you're looking for something to do in beautiful Southern Oregon, that would be a great place to be a week from tomorrow.
Yep, week from tomorrow. Yeah. It's gonna be a great conference. I'm looking forward to getting back to Oregon and seeing, being home, leaving the Texas weather. You don't know I'm living in Austin currently. I almost said I'm from Austin, but that's not true. I'm currently living in Austin, and it was 89 degrees the other day. So it just doesn't seem right, and I don't like it. I mean, y'all might think 89 sounds pretty good, right? Like I saw your look, Miranda and Ritu.
I know it's too hot.
It might mean the world's on fire, but yeah. I can wear a sundress.
Yeah, true. Yeah. But yeah, it's just.
We have a nicer spring in Oregon because of global warming. I mean, we do look at that. So. Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, so if you're just tuning in, we are doing what used to be kind of an annual, advocacy update when Ritu was like, neck deep in all the advocacy things, and still is to some extent, but not as much as he used to be when he was sort of the chair of the advocacy committee with AMSP and doing all the other stuff that he was doing. But Ritu said we should probably have an update, and I said we should. And he said, I need to find us a guest because I'm not in the loop as much as I was back in the day. So Ritu, why don't you introduce our guest to everybody, and we'll have Miranda kind of talk about herself a little bit. But why don't you kick us off, buddy?
Yeah. Plus, I've always wanted to have Miranda on the podcast because Miranda's wonderful and smart, and I mean, other than her poor choice of football.
I knew that was coming.
But I've known Miranda for a long time. She's been working with NAMSP as one of our government relations folks, along with Lisa Toffel. And I've just always wanted to have Miranda on as a professional to really talk about kind of these issues. So yeah, Miranda, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of who you work for and what your current position is. Then we can talk a little bit about how you got there.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. As Ritu mentioned, I think Ritu, we've been working together. I've been at the firm for 11 years, so at least the better part of a decade. I think you and I have been working on advocacy efforts together. Just for background, for those who don't know me, I'm a senior policy advisor at Holland and Knight, which is a law firm in Washington, D.C. The firm has a public policy practice that is 160 professionals that are working on a cross section of public policy issues. So I am in the healthcare practice. So I work on a broad cross chasm of healthcare issues, certainly EMS issues. And as Ritu mentioned, I have to give a lot of credit to my colleague, Lisa, who predates my time at the firm, who has a really niche specialty in EMS work and is one of the smartest people I know in this field. So I've been fortunate to sort of study under her in this realm for the last decade. But beyond EMS, I came from the physician trade association world, so have spent a lot of time working on physician issues, but also in my current capacity, do some life sciences, rare disease work, organ procurement, digital health, you sort of name it. If it's in the health sphere, I probably touch it in some capacity, from both a shoe leather lobbying, which I think we'll talk about a bit, and then also doing a lot of really niche reimbursement work. So I spend a lot of time interfacing with the agency, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, on a lot of reimbursement issues. So that is.
So let me ask a dumb question. So are you an attorney?
I'm not. Well, you can't be a lawyer and a lobbyist. That's just a lot of hatred coming in one direction. So
well, I think Lisa is an attorney.
Yes. So he's doubly hated. I decided to only go halfway down, the devil's, path. So I'm not an attorney. I have a master's in government. So the firm has this public policy practice. So I would say half of us are attorneys they are not practicing in the sense that they're not in a courtroom. They use their law degrees to bolster what they're doing in the policy arena. And then the rest of us who are what are known as policy professionals. And we do very much similar work. But the juxtaposition would be that Lisa, if needed, could help you. If Ritu decides to go out late tonight and do something nefarious, Lisa could represent him. I could not.
I wouldn't put that past him.
If it was nefarious and in DC, it was probably a place that you had suggested that we go.
Oh, I would be the catalyst of why you were in trouble. I just couldn't get you out of it by design.
It's because if you're heading to DC and you're an MSP person, you want good wine and food recommendations, Miranda is your person, because besides being a policy person, she's quite the foodie, as well as I think do you still have the wine newsletter?
I do. So I'm a certified specialist of wine, and I have an advanced certification from the Wine Spirit Education Trust. And I write for Wine Review Online and occasionally Decanter when they'll throw me some dollars for words.
That sounds awesome. Awesome.
All right, that's cool.
I've this is a departure from where we're going, but I've been trying to convince the firm, maybe if I put it on a podcast, this will happen, that if this healthcare thing doesn't work out, that the firm should hire me to be a firm maitre d' or concierge, where I just help clients figure out their dinner and wine needs. I think I would do quite well in that space.
See, this is why I think we hit it off so well early on, because this is exactly the kind of stuff. Like I do our dinners and wine stuff for my group, because I like that stuff.
Yeah,
so it's kind of funny. So it's so you said you have a master's in government,
right? I do.
So my daughter, you've met my daughter. Yeah. She just got in to get her master's of public policy.
I love it.
From Simon Fraser in Vancouver, BC.
Brilliant.
So she will be starting that program in the fall, and that's a 2-year program. And I think the second year includes a large co-op internship type component. So I will tell her that what?
I know a place that has internships.
Yeah, I'll tell her I know a place in DC that has internships around, and she's interested in healthcare policy also. So I think that would be perfect
Yeah.
for her. So, but what made you decide like healthcare policy? Like, how did you get there? You're from
Yeah,
Ohio originally, right?
I'm from Ohio, the great God's country. I,
Flattest land in the
okay,
world.
that was a huge eye roll. I mean, I grew up, by the way, Ritu, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, 4 seconds away from Detroit. There
That's
should be
right.
more affinity here. A little bit of a round robin to how I got here, but I am quite fortunate that I had parents who, when I suggested I wanted to do things when I was a kid, they're like, you should volunteer and do that. So you'll
Oh,
appreciate
nice.
this as clinicians. I very young, at a young age, aspired to be a physician. And my parents were like, great, you should be a candy striper at MCO, the medical college in Toledo.
Yep.
And I did that for about 3 weeks. I was like, I no longer aspire to be a physician. We can cross this off the list. I'm done. Once I wanted to be a marine biologist, and Ohio State has a program at Put in Bay. And so my mom made me do some little thing there. And I was like, yeah, I don't like fish. So this probably isn't a good space either. So anyway, very quickly, things were ruled out at a very young age.
So
But
I remember Put in Bay is the place though where you went for like when I was a resident in Pittsburgh, we went to Put in Bay to have
get hammered.
to get hammered. Yeah.
Yeah. That is true as a 21 and up or someone with a great ID. At the time, I was like 13. So that wasn't exactly where I lived. But Ohio State may not be known to many, definitely U of M supporters. But Ohio State has a prolific marine biology program. And part of that is actually they have a little subset of their campus at Put in Bay. And so my parents enrolled me in some marine biology course. Anyway, smart parents, they helped me roll out a lot of things. But I had this huge affinity for public service, and my mom jokes that when I was a kid, I was watching a convention. I mean, I was like jumping up and down and clapping at DNC, and she was like, oh gosh. So then she had me intern for Marcy Kaptur, my hometown member of Congress in the district office. And Marcy is still in office. She is the longest serving woman in Congress. She came to office in 1981. And she's quite prolific in my hometown, which is a blue collar town. My dad's an electrician. She was very big for labor rights. And I met her as a kid and I interned for her, and I turned around and told my parents I want to be her when I grow up. So that's not exactly how it turned out, but she, in many respects, really turned my attention to what being a public servant is and what public policy is. I was the first of my parents road testing it where I was like, this is sticking. This is something I'm really interested in. So I spent many summers interning for her in the district office. And then when I started college, I decided that political science was the place to go. And I made a very early, what sounds cliche decision, but that politics impacts policy and policy impacts people. And I wanted to be at the intersection of that. So I studied political science. I did an independent study for Ted Strickland, who at the time represented the area where I went to school in Ohio. And that led as a bridge to move to DC immediately upon graduation. And I interned for him in the federal office. And that was how I got to DC, and was a lowly little unpaid intern. And I was waitressing 40 hours a week while I was interning 40 hours a week. And I was completely in love with all of that sort of this processes. And the healthcare piece of it was sort of twofold. I shadowed a health legislative assistant who I was just I thought she was brilliant, and she was very kind and took me under her wing and would take me to briefings. And I just got exposed to a lot and had a great deal of interest. And also juxtaposed the same time I was diagnosed with cancer. And this is pre-ACA, and I was only 24. And the world of coverage looked a lot different than it does today. And I decided, after learning and seeing my parents try to navigate that process, that if nothing else, I was going to be the smartest consumer of healthcare that there could be, that I wasn't going to struggle to navigate through that process. So that sort of intersection is what led me to healthcare policy.
I did not know that about you.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then, so you spent time interning, and then when where did you get your master's from? Was that Hopkins?
So a few years ago, I started when I was 25. So I was working at the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, and they were and doing a lot of Medicare sort of policy work. It sounds very nip tuck. It wasn't, as you appreciate physicians. It was actually a lot of DOD, burn victim, children with cleft palate. It was actually much more altruistic than I think people envision. So it was actually an incredible opportunity. And I had the world's greatest boss. And she said, go to school at night and we'll figure it out while you work here. And that's what I did. So
That's great.
Yeah.
It's great to have people in your life that are like, we want to see you grow, and whatever we can do to help that happen. That's what we're here for.
Yeah. And 20 years later, she's still very much in my life, and I still count her as one of my greatest mentors.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Mike, you look like you want to ask something.
No, I'm just listening.
Yeah. So then, so you did that, and then you ended up at Holland and Knight, like you said, for like the last 11 years. I think that one of the things that you said that has resonated with me a lot is the policy and people and stories kind of intersect, and they make a huge difference. And what interested me and what has connected us, I was the president that, Rick Hunt was the president that started Advocates for EMS, which was our first NAMSP sort of first foray. And then to me, advocacy was, during my presidency at NAMSP, was really key. And even though we didn't start an advocacy committee till the next president after me, but that was a role that I think we really built during I think I sunset advocates and then went through the process of selecting Holland and Knight for specifically NAMSP's government relations stuff. But between that time and then the time I spent in government as the state medical director, that's when I kind of realized, wow, I mean, these policy decisions that people don't really follow, don't really kind of understand, even like where the comma goes sometimes, really do impact kind of services that people have that are available to them. So let's talk a little bit about the dirty word that you said a couple times. You said lawyer, but that wasn't, but lobbyist, and lobbyists have sort of like a bad name in this country, in the political world. But I guess the question is, what is meant by advocacy? I think some of our audience, because I talk about advocacy a fair amount, kind of understands it, but maybe not. So, and what does a lobbyist do? Like you hang out in the lobby? I have a friend who's a lobbyist for state government, and happened to run into him in the lobby of the Capitol. I'm like, hey, look, I ran into my lobbyist friend in the lobby. I thought that was. So what does that what does it mean really? What do you do? I mean, besides like, I'm sure you're doing like $200 handshakes to Congress.
I mean, I think that's the people don't know, right? So this is a great opportunity for you to educate us a little bit on that, because I think you're exactly right, Ritu. I think people just imagine or like play in their mind that it's just we're just handing out money to people to get a vote.
I'm assuming you go to like $20,000 a plate dinners all the time.
Yeah, gold leaf.
Yeah, exactly.
That's I wish. That sounds lovely. Well, it's so funny because when I go home in DC, it's different. But when I go home to Ohio, I would never, unless someone knows me and I've known them forever, someone says, what do you do? I would never say I'm a lobbyist. I would say, oh, I do healthcare policy. I'm a consultant. I actually went to my 20-year reunion and I said I do healthcare policy. So everyone thought I sold insurance. And I was like, that's not what I was going for, but
different kind of policy.
Maybe that's better. I don't know. But so I will say this is sort of a personal, I don't know how to change the paradigm, but right, like especially in an election year, every election year, lobbyists come under attack. What's wrong with Washington? And every politician says they're going to cast aside special interest and lobbyist funding. And when I have this conversation, and again, this happens less in DC than in other circles, but when I leave here, the simple thing I say is, were you ever a Girl Scout? Have you played cornhole? Are you over 65? Have you ridden a snowmobile? Because you've had a lobbyist represent you then. Because every interest, every American, if they know it or not, has a lobbyist representing them. I mean, again, cornhole has a lobbyist.
There's a cornhole lobbyist?
There sure is. It's my dream job as an Ohio.
That sounds pretty good.
I did want to, that was a great, just aside, I did order online and received it last week, my Michigan National Championship cornhole set. I actually have received 2 boards with Michigan logo and little bean bags with little national championship. I don't have a yard big enough to play cornhole in, but I did order the Michigan National Championship cornhole set.
I'm so glad you got that plug in.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I wasn't even planning on that plug.
I'm glad I let that slide in. But this is, I think, the misnomer that so rural city, big city, wherever you're from, you belong to something or you're engaged in something that has someone who is expressing the needs and translating what those are to a congressional delegation or to agencies. And to your point about a lobby, as I understand, sort of folklore would tell, I mean, a lobbyist goes back to the 1800s. Ulysses Grant would go to the Willard Hotel back in the day. He would take evening strolls and people would wait for him in the lobby of the Willard Hotel to petition him on whatever their issue was at the moment, right? But petitioning government is something that's protected by the First Amendment by design. And I think the distinction between lobbying and advocacy is that all lobbyists are advocates, not all advocates are lobbyists. And I mean that in the most technical way. So if you want to talk about a lobbyist is technically, it is someone who spends 20% of their daily job interfacing with members of Congress or officials in the agencies. So political officials with the agencies. Mm-hmm. And so if you're doing more than 20% of your work is in that arena, then you have to register as a lobbyist, which means you are part of arguably the most transparent industry that there is in the United States. So every dollar that you're giving to a political candidate, if I were to go to a wedding, for example, of a friend who is a congressional staffer, and my friendship predates my knowing them on the Hill, I have to go to an ethics committee to get permission to get them a wedding gift. So that is not something that you see in other industries. I have to worry about leaving a pen behind in a meeting if it's branded with my firm name. I mean, so that's completely unlike corporate America, where you can wine and dine. And the lobbying of the past, this predates me. In a world of 2003 pre-Jack Abramoff, it probably did look like that. But the last 20 years, it is the most regulated industry that there is. But ultimately, what it is the Hill and the agencies are inundated with issues. Ritu, as you know, when you meet with a health staffer, they are, EMS is something that they care about. They might meet with you on a DEA issue. 2 minutes later, they're meeting about organ procurement and kidney transplants. 10 minutes later, they're meeting about rare disease. And then they're meeting about an ACA, enhanced subsidy issue, right? Like they're so inundated. And I think what the advocacy is bringing education and resources and saying, we're the experts. And by we, the experts, I mean you, the physicians. And then I'm just the translator. I'm there to say, like, you're explaining the clinical piece. And then I'm saying, this is how it fits into the parliamentary procedure and the framework of what you're doing. And then I can put that into sort of legislative statute because I went to school for 6 years to do that, right? Like it's the same expertise that an accountant has, but mine just happens to be in the political process.
The example that I always use when I talk to other, and you may have given this to me, but when I talk to groups about advocacy in general, I'm usually talking to a medical crowd, and I'm like, if somebody came to you today and said, hey, the laws around interstate trucking are creating a problem, and I need you to fix them, and you would say, and I say, who here has enough depth of knowledge to be able to do that? And everybody goes, well, I don't know anything about interstate trucking. And then I said, Well, who here thinks that their congressperson is smarter than they are? Nobody raises their hand then either. And I'm like, so you have this person who is at least you think equal intelligence to you, who knows nothing about your field, but you want them to fix the problems in your field. Don't you think you ought to talk to them about that first before they make decisions around what the field, what your field is or what's going to impact your field? And they all look at me like, oh, that makes sense. So.
Well, and that's the translation part too, right? So I don't purport to have any of the clinical acumen that you do. Now, I understand Medicare pretty well. And, I've spent 20 years sort of in CPT books and the like. They're all sitting right here. But you can explain to me, and I mean, probably dumb it down and explain it to me. And then I learn the issue and I write the white paper or whatever it is. But then I can translate that to the Hill staffer to say, okay, this is the issue at hand that needs to be addressed. And it's happening to your constituents. But then I can translate that has jurisdiction and your problem into their world and explain it from how they need to understand it. So, I mean, a lot of it's just that it's sort of it sounds like a middleman, and to some extent it is, but it's being able to sort of walk and talk both, worlds. Like I have a leg here and I have a leg here, and then I can just be the intermediary. Also, you don't have the time, like you're treating patients, right? Like this is like you explain the problem and then we figure out how to solve it. We're not getting paid for medical direction, like figure this out. And right. So that's our job. And I do think the other piece, now that I'm on my soapbox, if people knew how unsexy this job was, like I wish I was hanging out with Nancy Pelosi in my 6-inch stilettos eating, like filet toast. Half the time I'm reading 1,600-page regulations, like in my office in sweatpants. And then I'm writing a 50-page memo about what that regulation means. I'm not even talking to the Hill. I'm writing that so a doctor understands how to now become compliant with whatever the agency just did. Or I'm writing issue briefs or amicus briefs, or I'm responding to an RFI that was 80 pages and I'm writing 100 pages of response. Like so much of my job is just reading and writing. The part of it of me actually sitting in front of a covered official is probably 15% of it. Mm-hmm. And the other 85 is just analyzing and writing and analyzing, forming coalitions of like people to try to address an issue, figure out what the implications of something are, what the headwinds are, tailwinds. Like it's very unsexy. It's definitely not like the George Clooney thought about having a show called K Street that never came to fruition, but it's not whatever that was going to be. Like it's just not. Yeah.
So I've got a question for you. So in 2004, I was AAA Star of Life and got to come to DC and go make the rounds and speak to my representatives and all the stuff. And it was a good time. And I think I was 1 for 2. Otherwise, I was talking to one of the staffers. Totally good, right? They prep us for that and say, you know what, don't discount that in right? Like those are the people doing the work, right? Like so. But if I hear you, like there's probably some advantage, and I realize there's probably a PR piece, and just getting in front of people is good, and I suppose that's good. But like there are a lot of real issues out there. So I think of programs like the Day on the Hill, where EMS providers are going to go out there and talk to people. Like, I mean, can those be just as effective when we're trying to talk to our representatives about the things that matter to us in our areas, as having somebody like yourself that can like get in there and really translate some of that. And I suppose they kind of go hand in hand, right? I mean, to some extent.
Yeah, no, they unequivocally do. I think they're extremely important. Again, I can go in and have a meeting on the behalf of Ritu or at ESP and say, this is what are the pain points and we need to address this. It's a whole nother thing entirely for Ritu to meet with someone in the Oregon delegation and say, I don't know every, like Clackamas County, like this is happening. Like, I don't know every county. I can't speak to what's happening at that level. And he can. And so he'll meet with his delegation and sort of bring it down and distill it down to that level. And then I get to swoop in, and follow up and say, okay, you heard from Ritu what's going on. Now you know exactly how this impacts your district, your constituents. So let's talk about how we do this on a national scale. Like how do we implement this now? And let's talk about what bill, what vehicle, let's talk brass tacks about all the legislative pieces. Ritu doesn't have to speak to that. He just has to talk about what he does and what he's doing on the ground. So it unequivocally matters, I think. And you're building a relationship, just like any industry. Like relationships matter. I'm sure they matter when you're working with hospitals, and your relationships matter. And it's the same here. You have to build a rapport, and people have to trust you, and that's not innate. They have to know that you're being honest, that you're a true broker, that you want to share intelligence that's going to be useful to the office. And once they feel like they have that, then they'll call you to testify in front of a committee. I mean, you're kind of building up to all these things. So yes, I think it's very kind of hand in hand, that those two events. But I would implore anyone who hasn't or is interested in returning, those Advocate Days really do. It might not feel like it in the moment, but they really do matter.
So one of the things that that Ritu had on some of our talking points, and I think this is a great lead in to that, and we've talked about this before, but and we've actually seen this in action at a conference where a talk that Ritu gave on advocacy led somebody in that audience to go back to their home and literally have success in the sort of the process and made a change in their area, and it was really cool. So the question is what can I do? I'm a paramedic. I currently live in Austin, but Oregon's my home, right? So what could anybody do that's in the industry? How can they go and start building that relationship with their representatives? Is it a big drawn out process? Like how does somebody do that if they've got something they really want to talk about or just establish a relationship?
So it is a rare circumstance that a congressional office won't meet with a constituent. So you can, this is all sort of public domain, either in your district office or the federal office, look up who's in charge of healthcare and say, in your instance, it could be, I'm working on a community paramedicine project. I just want you to know what's going on in the district. It's really exciting. This is who we're serving. This is the outcomes we've had. It doesn't even have to be an ask. It just be like, we want to give you an update and just know I'm here as a resource. I actually think the best way to initially engage isn't a fix this, it's on fire. It's just want you to know I'm here. This is what I'm doing. It's really exciting. If you have any questions, if you want to come do a site visit and see it in person when you're back in the district, if it's the federal office or if they're in the district, and just build that relationship over time. It's like dating. You don't have someone to marry you on the first date. Like it's a slow dance, right? Like it's coffee first, then it's a cocktail, and then it's full courtship. But I think you have to truly, it sounds silly, but kind of pursue it that way. And then when there is something that's on fire, you already have this relationship and they know you, and you can say, I need you to intervene. Like we need help. And you've already built that rapport with the office. But people will meet with constituents. That's their job. They're, at the end of the day, these are public servants. Forget that like they're trying to get reelected. Their whole purpose is to be delegates to their constituents. That's their whole like purpose as being a member of Congress. So I think people get intimidated by that, and they shouldn't. They're public servants. That's their job.
To me, the thing that was the most surprising was, or one of the things that was very surprising was just how relatively open really everything is. I mean, to go into the office buildings at Congress, you got to go through a metal detector because you're going to the airport, and that's it. You don't need an appointment. Like you can go to your congressperson's office, but I did that. What's funny is
you're a known celebrity on the Hill now. So.
Yes, I guess.
I feel like an appointment would be good.
Our last lobby day, well, actually, that is what happened. I stopped in at I didn't have an appointment with my representative, and I said I'm just going to go to her office. I have a break. I'm just going to go in. And I went in, and I talked to the receptionist. And I said, I'm a EMS medical director in Clackamas County, and I'm here on a lobby day, and somehow I didn't get an appointment. And then he looked at me and he goes, I'm an EMT. I know who you are.
Wow, that was a little bit of a humble brag there, but that's good.
Well, yeah, it was a humble brag. It was just an out brag actually. But I mean, just seeing, but I've seen people just stop in and say, take like pictures and stuff like that. And like, I know Merkley, for instance, has a coffee every like third Wednesday or something. And so if you're in DC on that Wednesday, you can go and it's a open coffee with Senator Merkley. But I mean, it's actually pretty easy to get an appointment with somebody. And that's the thing. And really, the member of Congress, they're so busy. And when you think about the topics, Miranda listed like 8 things just that the healthcare LA has to worry about. Well, the member has to worry about everything. So you're even a smaller sliver of the time. And I think you're better off knowing the staff person than you are getting that 30 seconds with the member, unless you really resonate with them and then the member says to the staff, fix this now, then that's like a home run. But that doesn't really happen very often. What does happen is you get on the radar screen of that staff person, and then and then something happens in 3 months, that you're a resource to them. Nobody likes to, first time when you meet somebody, to say, hey, I'm here, can you give me something?
Yeah. Well, I would just echo the staff piece too, just quickly, because I do think people discount because they're young, and they're young because, by the way, it's like 90 hours a week and it's very thoughtless pay. So it's for the young and hungry and able, without families for the most part, who can do that. But most of these people, their families are still in the districts that they're representing. Like where you're talking about is their home. Like their mom and dad is still there. They're very invested in what's happening back home. And like me, they're policy nerds, right? Like they have a specialty whenever policy, there's a legislative assistant for basically every policy domain. So there's a healthcare one, there's an energy one. So this is their subspecialty. I mean, they have expertise in this. Where a member of Congress, no matter how bright, they're not just, to Ritu's point, just focused on healthcare. They're not going to know the ins and outs. You're going to meet a member, they're going to ask you about baseball, or they're just going to have a collegiate conversation with you, where not all staffers, but most staffers can really get in the weeds with you, and they'll know, despite being 24, way more than you would anticipate that they know. So I do think people discount those staff because they're young, but they're the ones who are deciding what they're going to elevate to their boss, and how their bosses, they don't have to share the memo of your meeting, right? Like, but they can prioritize it because they think it's important, and then tell their boss that they should in return prioritize it. So those meetings matter, certainly.
Well, and I mean, fundamentally, treating everybody you come across with respect is the right thing to do anyway. But I mean, wasn't Richard Hudson a staff person at one point? I'm trying to remember.
Right. Well, yes, and his wife is currently a congressional staffer. But the old adage in DC is yesterday's intern is tomorrow's boss,
right.
Which is
exactly.
very true.
Yeah, and I remember when we started working on the DEA stuff, Richard's staff person, Preston, was like a new staff guy, and then I think he ended up being in charge of that office, right?
Well, yes, he was LD, but now he's prominent Ways and Means Committee staff.
Is he really?
What?
Oh, good guy too. Just a really, really nice guy to work with. But I mean, and we helped each other, because as a staff person, if you can get a bill shepherded through, that's a big plus. And he worked on that bill really, really hard. But I mean, I think that was one of his first big projects, and it was good for both of us. But I think building these relationships is, when I did lobby days, I've done a number of them, and you end up going back and they're like, weren't you here last year? And that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They wouldn't recognize you with your hair though now.
No, that's true.
Who let the homeless guy in? Jeez,
that's right. Well, and I got smart. I brought my daughter a couple of times, and they always like a kid. Especially when you have, like a high school junior who's interested in healthcare policy, they're all over it.
I'm curious for the people that are watching and sort of interacting. Thanks for joining us, by the way. But do you guys have any questions that are watching? Throw them in the chat there, or what issues are concerning you right now? I mean, is it is it reimbursement? Is it like, what is it? Throw it in the chat and we'll see if we can slide it in. Is that yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, I see. Hey, Joseph, I will get wine recommendations on the side, but the DA, we should over the DA, Ritu.
Yeah, that was going to be my first question.
I was going to ask, like, there was so much work done. We did so many podcasts trying to get the word out on this. I mean, it was great, and it died because there was an election thing, and then we got it in, and it passed, and there was the law. We changed the law, and we've been waiting for rules for how long?
Since 2020.
It seems like 2001 we've been waiting, but let's talk about it. What's going on with the DEA stuff?
Well, I wish I just saw the note, so I felt like I needed to acknowledge it. I wish I had a better update. Just for those who may not be aware, one of the things that NASP long advocated for with great success was the Patient Protection for Access to Emergency Medications Act, which passed in 2017.
2017.
And so basically this was a standalone bill, which by the way is in itself unprecedented, that we kind of moved to standalone bill that codified the practice of standing orders by a physician medical director for the administration of controlled substances. And then it also addressed EMS agencies to permit to have one DA registration, which, as you are all more acutely aware, rather than having separate registrations, which was a huge issue in the field, which again, this goes back to the translation, which is not something I would innately know, but you all presented that issue to Lisa and I, and how catastrophic that was. And we were like, well, how do we fix this? So we found the folks on the Hill, Richard Hudson and Steve Cohen from Tennessee, to sort of champion this. And they did. And again, to get a standalone bill, I think Lisa has a signed bill in her office, or a copy of it. To get that done was quite a feat. And so what it necessitated, though, is the DEA to promulgate a rule, which they did in proposed form in 2020. The problem is they have yet to finalize it. So Richard Hudson, Lisa reached out to him last week to have him continue to weigh in with the agency, and the agency keeps reassuring Congress that it's coming, which I know that's not a great answer to anyone. But it's far too prolonged at this point. We have verbalized that in every fashion to the Hill and to the sponsors who are invested in this bill to ensure the DA comes out with that. COVID was sort of used as a rationale for why there was a delay, and certainly drug shortages now is sort of the second layer to this. But just know I completely appreciate the frustration, but we continue to try to use every lever we can to get Congress to push on DA to get that out. So we keep hearing soon, but we've been hearing soon for 4 years now. So as soon as we get more information, I'll be back on this podcast to champion it. I wish I had better news to say that it was coming out in the near term, but we just don't have that intelligence yet.
So is that typical? Like, so, because I'm not familiar with the, with kind of, well, I wasn't really familiar with any of it until we started talking about it and did the stuff. But like, is this kind of a delay? Is that a normal thing, or?
I don't know if normal is the right word. So the DEA is on so CMS, for example, has annual fee schedules, as you all know, like the Medicare physician fee schedule, that has to come out by statute by a certain timeline. Because it informs, obviously, payment for the coming calendar year. DA isn't held to those kind of standards. And so they're not statutorily bound to anything. But so I wouldn't say it's typical, but I could also cite many other examples where rules have been delayed. For example, I'm going back to the organ procurement example. I've been waiting on a secondary guidance on conditions for coverage for organ procurement organizations since 2020 as well. And that's coming out of CMS. And so it's been on what's called the unified agenda, which is the government's way of telling you rules are forthcoming, but they're not. It's been saying spring of every calendar year for the last 3 years without any real. So it's not completely atypical, but I don't want to say it's the norm either. Yeah. Which again, I know that doesn't help at all, but I just saw some of the notes, so I wanted to give an update.
Well, what's going on in the world of EMS advocacy and with NAMSP, or just any, like, what's cooking right now?
Yeah, so lots of things. I think our express focus as of late, sort of following what Congress has been really focused on, is drug shortages. And so in this instance, certainly drug shortages in the EMS space. And so, as you all may know, NASP spent a painstaking amount of time to basically create a repository of what the drugs are that are in shortage in the EMS space specifically. And so you all curated that list, and we shared it on the Hill and with others. And Congress has been, in light of some of the oncology shortages and others, has been really prolific about trying to come to some sort of resolution. So they've been putting out what's known as RFIs, requests for information, about how to just fix drug shortages globally. So we've been responding to all of that. About a lot of the ideals from Congress have been very hospital centric. The hospital should have a stockpile for 3 months. And so we had to keep pointing out, that's great. But if you have a stockpile in a hospital for 3 months, what does that mean for the shortages that are happening in pre-hospital care? And does that exacerbate them because you now have all the drugs just sitting in a stockpile in the hospital setting? So this goes back to the education. That proposal wasn't meant to be nefarious to EMS, but they didn't know that it was until someone said, wait, this isn't a great idea. So CMS had proposed that in one of the fee schedules last year, and NASP responded in kind, and they didn't finalize the proposal as a result. And they even acknowledged our comments and said, we didn't really think through the implications of what this would mean outside the hospital settings. And so for the moment, we're not finalizing this policy. So we've been really focused on looking at, can we create an advisory committee within the government that looks at the shortages of critical emergency medications, looking specifically at sort of some of the blood shortages as well. So not just drugs and sterile injectables.
Okay.
So that's.
I just want to interrupt 1 second because you brought up something just 30 seconds ago that was really important. You know, prior to NAMSP engaging in having government relations representation through Holland and Knight and Miranda and Lisa, and previously Ethan, that jerk. Those kind of conversations would happen. And in fact, part of the driver of some of this from back at Advocates for EMS was that there would be an issue like drug shortage or September 11th, 2001, where there was then a response proposed, and there was nobody there from EMS to raise their hand and say, hey, this doesn't work for us. And so the fact that Miranda and Lisa were able to understand that there was this rule coming out, review the rule, let NAMSP know about it, and NAMSP say, well, this won't work for us, be in this space. You have to be present to win. And having, it's not just about like government relations day on the Hill. It's actually the permanent presence of having someone like Miranda there to flag this stuff for us. I mean, that's a real, what will end up being a tangible win for the EMS community, that you guys were able to pull an EMSP on this.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I will say the other, as I'm just going through cliches all evening, I mean, the other like DC cliche, but I believe it's true. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? Like, and there's truly something to that. So it is just a big part of our job is to just ensure that we are monitoring everything. And luckily, and I give a lot of this credit to Lisa, but because we've been in this space for so long, we're like, wait, this doesn't seem right. And then we're able to check in with y'all and just say, right, this would be bad. And then you reaffirm that, and then we figure out a strategy within it. But all to be said, so drug shortages is one of the things that's sort of top of mind of Congress, and potentially moving vehicle. So we've been very focused on that moving vehicle, and that they might do something on drug shortages legislatively this year. The other thing is that we are crafting legislation as we speak around a MedPAC study. So MedPAC is the Medicare Advisory Committee to Congress. They make recommendations. They are non-binding, but Congress does usually adhere to what they have to say on physician compensation for EMS medical directors. So one of the things that we've continued to hear from you all is, you are providing tremendous oversight as medical directors, and you're not being properly compensated for that. And unequivocally, you are driving better outcomes. And so how can we qualify that in a way that demonstrates that there needs to be a reimbursement component to it? And so we can say that, but we sort of need a third party to evaluate that. And so one of the things that we're asking Congress to do is to direct MedPAC to do this study that potentially could set the stage for the establishment of a COP, conditions of participation, or something of the like, to ensure that there's reimbursement for EMS medical directors. So we're working on sort of a joint bill that would address that. We recently learned, admittedly, this was a new element to me, I'm sure not to you all, but at wall time and the impact of wall time. And, just where EMS personnel are waiting on the wall of an ED before a patient is transferred, and how to address that. So incorporating some remedies to that in the bill, and then also drug shortages. So we're sort of packaging that bill at the moment. And then the other sort of long-standing issue that we've been working on is the ET, as you all probably are aware of, the ET3 model. That was intended to be a 5-year voluntary model. It was cut short. And so we've had numerous meetings with CMMI, the Innovation Center, within the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services, about, well, so what's the next iteration of this, and how do we do treatment in place, but transport to an alternative destination and ensure there's reimbursement for this following the COVID waivers. So there's several members of Congress who are interested in this. But again, our role in this isn't just the triage, it's ensuring that there's proper payment for the treatment of a patient where they are, even if they aren't triaged to an alternative destination. So we have a different lens than other folks about how to address this. So we're trying to really educate about why there needs to be that other tier of this that other people aren't considering, sort of an evolution of ET3. So that's a big piece that we're working on. And then I would just say there's sort of reauthorization of Lorna Breen, which I think you all might be familiar with.
Can you explain that for maybe people that aren't familiar?
Sure. So Lorna Breen was a physician. And so there's been a bill, the Healthcare Provider Protection Act. She was a provider who during the pandemic ultimately ended up taking her life. And the impetus of that was, as I best understand, was just the pressures of what she was enduring as a clinician during a very horrific time, which I'm sure you all are acutely aware of and experience. So this would essentially create a national campaign of how to help health providers from a hospital-based solutions to help with well-being for physicians, and provides grants around it. So the bill passed overwhelmingly in a previous session of Congress. So now we're in a reauthorization phase where we just want to ensure the program continues and there are grants. So it's something that NASP has really championed and wanted to see advance and move forward. So yeah, that's kind of a snapshot of what we're working on for y'all.
I was waiting for Ritu to jump in.
No, it's all
awkward. There was an awkward pause there.
No. Pauses are okay, Mike.
Which, if you're listening to this, I've edited it out, so you won't know what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, it was a good 8 seconds. I counted.
It was not 8 seconds. No, it's great. It's great stuff. I think the other thing from an NAMSP perspective, Jay-Z put in the chat speaking to the commissioner in June, but NAMSP does its own fly-in lobbying or government relations day. It was one of the things we started when I was advocacy chair, called the NAMSP Government Relations Academy. And that is free if you are a member of NAMSP. It's not free. It is a member benefit. You are paying for it, but through your membership. There's just no added fee to it. That is in early June, I believe June 4th and June 5th in Washington, D.C.
One floor above me.
What?
One floor above me. We will host you in the lovely conference room overlooking the White House. It's a pristine,
gorgeous conference room, actually, which does have a great view of the White House. You are only you can tell how cool a lobbying firm is or a government relations firm by how far they are from the White House, and y'all are pretty close.
We're also like 50 miles from the hill, so
Yeah,
it's true.
that's true. It does take a while to get to the hill from there, and I guess if you're closer to the hill, then maybe that's the right place to be. But the Government Relations Academy consists typically of sort of one day of meetings in which NEMSP and Lisa and Miranda and their staff bring in staff members from agencies to meet with us. They provide an overview of what's some of the very issues that we're talking about now. They provide snacks. Yes, Jay-Z, they do provide snacks. So there's a lot of discussion. There's dialogue so that Lisa and Miranda can hear directly from the members of there what are the issues that are important. So it allows them to help build the agenda for the next year, 2 years, 5 years. There's usually a very fun, Holland and Knight is a bipartisan government relations firm. So they have staff members with history on sort of both sides of the aisle. And we usually have one former one D and one R former member of Congress come in and do a little bit of a roadshow about and it's usually very entertaining, kind of a global, not a healthcare focus, but sort of a global focus on kind of the state of the state in politics and legislative relationships. It's usually much more interesting in an election year. So this year's is probably going to be even more entertaining. Although I remember very clearly at Government Relations Academy in March of 2016, the term unelectable was used about the individual who ultimately became the Republican nominee that year. And as late as March, we had no idea that person was going to be the nominee.
You're being very discreet.
Nobody will know whatever we were talking about.
That's his middle name.
Yeah. But so it's a full day of sort of conversation, education, and meeting with. We've brought in folks from like the FDA drug shortages office a couple of times to meet with us, and they found that they say it's been very helpful to hear the EMS perspective. And then the second day is Hill visits, which again are and you don't go in cold. The staff. The appointments are made for you, so you don't have to call and be all there. I'm going to be there on Friday. Can you make, the staff will set up, you will get a schedule of your visits. And you will also have the talking points. So you'll go out with folders with leave behinds and talking points. And I know Mike mentioned that he'd done that as the Stars of Life. And Miranda's right. Those staffers that you meet with have like 20 of those visits in a day. So you are trying to break through the noise, if you will, but it only really takes like one visit to one person to break through the noise. And then the other piece is, if it's your third year in a row or fourth year and you're seeing the same staff person, it's much easier to break through the noise on that also. So I would use this to pitch Government Relations Academy. And then we usually try to find a nice place to eat that Miranda has recommended to us.
Well, I just want to point, we do have good snacks. This thing is full of wine. I'll carry it upstairs if you guys come. I promise, wine and like Oreos. I don't know, that feels like a great pairing. But in all seriousness, to Ritu's point too, if you've not done this before, we spend a lot of time the day before walking. We don't just hand you a piece of paper and say, these are the talking points. We spend a lot of time walking through them, kind of advocacy 101, how to engage. We don't want you to feel ill-equipped. And for those who are brand new, to the extent that there's enough people to go around, like either Lisa or I will accompany folks who are new, so they have someone with them if that makes them at greater ease in the meetings.
I mean, if you can get some friends to go too, it is definitely easier to have 2 or 3 people walking in and doing the meeting with you. And if you can usually get somebody who's been there before, they can kind of run you through the first one. And it's not that I mean, it's again, the first, when I do it, I'm like always surprised at the accessibility. It's great. And it makes me feel better about our country when I do it, because there's accessibility. I think a lot of countries would not have that accessibility to their legislators. And it also gives you the toolbox to take that group of skills home. Because I think the other thing that's really important as a medical director, you are an advocate for your community in your local region. And it gives you those tools. You can do it in a structured environment. You have Miranda and Lisa there to help to teach you. And then when you come back home, you have those tools to go to your state legislator or to your state or your county commissioner and have the same type of conversations. Because the other thing that's really interesting is you realize that these are just people and they're hungry for information. And you learn that if you can give them good, usable information, that's really helpful. And stories, they like stories. Tell a good story.
Yeah.
So
cool. Well, we're just about up on it. Miranda, let's say someone's listening or watching right now and they're trying to gumption up the courage to go set that meeting up. What words of advice would you have for them?
So I'd say that's not a lobbyist function. I mean, if Ritu asked me to set up a meeting, I would happily do that. But you don't need me to do that. I think there's, again, a bit of a misnomer there. I can give you the email if that, I can pull that for you, but that piece is simple. What I'm for is the strategy or drafting legislation and, the coalition building, the just meeting with a healthcare staff member, either in the district or the federal office. Is to Ritu's point, it's about just telling your story. And that's what they want to hear. And they want to hear how that translates back to their district and to the people that they are intended to serve. And that's what they're there for. And to Ritu's point, these meetings are so much more informal than people, I think, probably envision. Sometimes they're in a hallway, or a crowded table with a bunch of cubicles around and people feverishly typing away. But the misnomer about DC, and I won't say all of it, there are bad actors like everywhere, but people came here because they care. I really truly believe that. Like, we all left our respective homes and our families because we wanted to make some good change. And that is the same with Hill staffers. They want to do something good. So if you help them and tell them what needs to be done that improves something, I think they really want to be a good steward of that. So that's something that you all do not need someone like me for, that you can very much do on your own and shouldn't be intimidated about in the least. But if you feel more comfortable, I am always here to help facilitate all of that. So I think it's just based on your personal preference, but don't be sheepish about what is your constitutional right.
And don't think all the actions in DC. Local staff members are important too.
Absolutely.
So all of your Congress people have a staff in DC and they have a staff at home, and they're separate staffs, but they're in communication. And local staff people, you don't need your congressperson to be here. You connecting with a local staff person is equally important as effective. And they all like to ride around in ambulances, I've found.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can provide some type of experience to them, they love that stuff. They like to do visits and see things. They like to they like to be able to tell their bosses that this is what we're seeing on the ground right now in the district.
Well, last thing, it's a reverse lobby day, right? Like, you guys come here to learn parliamentary procedure and to see how the Hill works and an elevated version of Schoolhouse Rocks. It's the same thing. Like, the staff is going on your version of a Hill day. They are learning tactilely, in person, physically, what it is to be an EMS medical director. Like, sometimes you just need to touch and feel it, right? And that does matter. So those site visits, I would say, if you're meeting with folks, and if you're willing and you want to offer them the ability to come and ride on an ambulance, I would be surprised if you don't have someone who isn't invested for life because they got to experience that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Ritu, any other final thoughts? And I can get us on down the road here.
No, thanks, Miranda, for coming on and appreciate it. It was great to see you. right now plan to be there in June. I got some scheduling
Wonderful.
things to move around, but I will hopefully see you.
I'll start finding out the dinner reservations.
There you go. Pulling
All right,
out the
cool.
Ohio State gear to wear, right?
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, I will get us out of here. On behalf of Miranda and Dr. Ritu Sani, Mike Verkest, you've been watching and listening to the EMS show. Thanks you guys for tuning in on a wonderful Wednesday night or whenever you may be listening. Stay tuned for our next episode, which I'm sure will be in the next couple of weeks. I think we might be doing something from State of Jefferson. So stay tuned for that. That'll be pretty awesome. So other than that, you guys all have a good night and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Hey, thanks for listening to the EMS show. Let's continue this conversation. What do you say? Check out the official Facebook page and Twitter feed. The EMS show is a Firedog production.